Hey everyone, I'm Tony Marinera, obviously, and I just wanted to say thank you for either checking out the video or listening on Spotify. I obviously appreciate it no matter how you're checking this out, but I just wanted to put this at the beginning of the first few episodes to just say I've never done something like this before, and because of that, that means there's going to be either audio issues or, video issues and anything like that. And things might not always be 100% in these first few episodes, but uh, I hope you enjoy what I've put out so far. And obviously, as time grows on, I'll learn and grow, and I have some fun things in store that I'd like to try. So hopefully you enjoy what you hear in these first few episodes, and as time goes on, maybe if you're finding this later on, this won't matter. But I hope you enjoy it. In the meantime, get cozy, get comfortable, and enjoy the spooky tales in Tales from the Saucy Crypt. And stay saucy. Thanks. How is everyone doing tonight? As you can see, I'm on a different side of the room tonight. Be a little more over here, I think, right? Cause I realized something. Hold on. Gotta turn my fan on. Cause I realized something. And that's I'm left-handed. So I've had my whole setup as if I was right-handed for the reading streams for some reason. Because I usually and what I mean by that is because when I play games, when I play on my computer, I'm right-handed. Well, I'm not right-handed. I'm actually left-handed. But my dad was the only one who used to use the computer at home, besides myself. But I was younger when we were first using the computer. So he would use it more. So I just eventually learned how to use like mouse and keyboard as a righty. And that's probably the only thing I know how to do right-handed. If I had to guess. If I had to think. I'm trying to think. Yeah, no, I think... I don't know. That's, I forgot that that's where the fire sound is, because we're on the fire scene. Yeah, I think mouse and keyboard... Oh, when I was in food service, I did that a lot right-handed. Because typically I was the only left-handed person that worked at the places. Everyone else was right-handed. So I learned how to use everything right-handed when I would work in food service. So those are probably the only two things. Most computers are right-handed anyway. I don't think I've seen people use computers left-handed. It's weird. It feels weird even to me. I still haven't tracked down a physical copy of the Sauciest Necronomicus. But, I'm hoping I do soon. Today, I got more stories from the anonymous sender from last week. Whoever you are, if you are tuning in, thank you for continuing to send me the stories. Obviously, I appreciate it. So I've been trying to obviously find a copy of the real book for a few weeks now, kind of ever since I started this. I've gone to every corner of the internet. I've searched the dark web now. And after I searched the dark web last week, the whole binder showed up with stories in it, and it said, "Be careful what you wish for." But I do want a real copy. And I didn't even ask for more stories this week. They just showed up in just a sealed envelope, and it was just printed stories that I was able to add more to the binder. But first, before we crack open the stories for today, I dropped the lighter to light the stuff in it. Before we get started on the stories today, we should light the protection incense to bless both of the room, and I'm hoping that it protects the spirits from getting to everyone viewing, because I don't even know if it'll affect those of you who are watching later after this has been recorded. But I have to at least protect it in every way I can from the spirits inside the tome. So we're just gonna light that up. Oh, of course the fan's gonna try to blow it out on us. There you go. Ooh, this one smells very, very churchy. So we'll put that there right in front of good old Protection Kitty. Or Protection Kitten, or Protection Cat, whatever we want to. And sorry for your eyes, Protection Kitty. When pretty soon I'm gonna, like I said, I'm trying to get a tapestry and get rid of the whole green screen just for these streams and recordings. But yes, Protection Cat protects us with his very chipper smile and little red nose and little cat outfit and bow tie. So thank you, Protection Kitty, for doing your work. Hello, Penta. How is your night going? I hope you're having a good night. Let me get something to drink. Want to make sure. I'm gonna super quick be right back. I want to make sure Caitlin is awake for work. So. Sorry, everyone. In fact, for some reason, her alarm hasn't been going off. She actually wasn't awake. So it's a good thing I checked. It was shit and I'm stressed? Yes. Yes, good. Read about it. Alright. I'm back. Okay. So, like always, before we get started here, I'm gonna read the opening prayer from it. That all creatures, all ghouls, all demons, all frights that call this ancient tome their home, I call upon thee to enter this hallowed ground. Exit this tome and regale us with your memories. No harm shall come upon those who listen and those who tell these dark tales. Protection has come in all forms, and your only purpose is to regale us with your stories. I call upon you, ghosts of the Saucy Tomb. Enter this home now and give me permission to tell your tales. So that is our spell to start. And without further ado, I think we'll get started with the first story, which is titled, My Mother Has a Special Weekly Routine, but lately she's been a little off. My mother had always been a little peculiar. She liked doing things a specific way, and always on one specific day there was a routine she found herself in. Since I was just a child, and no matter the situation, the weather, or her mood, the routine would never vary. On Mondays, she did the planning. She would spend early noon making a list, always on paper, about all the meals we would have that week. Then she would go through the cupboards and the fridge to see what we still had and added everything we needed to the list in her perfect cursive handwriting. On Tuesdays, she would go to the fish market just before sunrise, continue to visit the butcher around noon, and finally buy all the other items we needed from the big grocery store just at the outskirts of our suburban neighborhood. On Wednesdays, she cleaned, or rather, we cleaned. While Mum liked things a specific way and would usually go over whatever I did after I was finished, she did always accept my help. I suppose it was more for building my character than for an actual need of help. On Thursdays, she did laundry. When the sun was shining, she would hang the clothes on a line out in the garden. And if it didn't, she would use the dryer inside. Either way, Thursdays always smelled like lavender softener. On Fridays, she baked muffins and cakes and biscuits. With many spices and herbs, she would make her own creations. Those were the only days that smelled even better than Thursdays. On Saturdays, she would go for a drink. When I was younger, that's when the babysitter would come, but now she could go without having to take care of that. Sometimes she would see her friends and come back in a giggly mood. Sundays were what we called free days. It was the only day that was not assigned to one specific task. We worked during the week so that the weekend can be enjoyed. I heard that sentence more often than I could ever count. As I said, my mother had always been a little peculiar, and as I grew older, I realized she was also a little, well, if not a lot, compulsive. In all my years in life that I lived in that small suburban house with my mother, I never saw her deviate from that schedule. Of course, I wasn't always there to observe, but when I came home from school on Tuesdays, the fridge and cupboards would be fully stocked again. Thursdays would smell like lavender, and Fridays we always had fresh baked goods. Even on holidays, she would find ways to squeeze in whatever needed to be done on the specific days of the week. My mother wasn't always entirely mentally stable, which is something hard to witness as a child and especially to admit. You want your parents to always do well and tell yourself that they are fine even when they're not. However, in most ways, she luckily seemed to be in control of her compulsions. And most of all, she was always kind and loving. To both of us, despite the occasional fight. Especially as I grew older and resented her slightly old-fashioned ways. Still, we were a happy family, and in general, things were all right. Until last week, when my mother, for the first time ever since I can remember, seemed to be out of sync. It started on Monday when I woke up. I found my mother in the living room watching something strange on TV. The sight of that was weird enough already because normally she would never turn on the television by herself before evening, and now she was sitting there, wearing her flowery dress and high heels inside while watching something with complete focus in her eyes. "Mom?" I muttered. Her head slowly turned to the left. She looked up at me and looked at me precisely. No words came out of her mouth. When I looked over at the screen to see what she had been so mesmerized by, that's when I noticed the white noise. There was no channel on. I sat down next to her, tried to find the words to ask what was wrong, but I couldn't. She was acting as if everything was perfectly normal, until Dad came down the stairs with his briefcase in hand. "Good afternoon, honey. Are you ready for lunch?" she asked him. My father tilted his head. You could tell that something was wrong, but he didn't mention it either. Instead, he only lifted his briefcase a little and said, "I must go to work." "But of course," my mother smiled. I exchanged a concerned look with my father. He definitely knew that something was up, and I wondered whether they had a fight last night. Was that why Mom was acting strange? Before I could talk to him, however, he had disappeared, and Mom jumped up only 2 seconds later. "I need to go to the dry cleaners. You can make yourself something to eat, yes?" On Tuesday, I didn't expect to see my mother when I got up. At this time, she normally would be at the fish market to get the freshest catch. Instead, I found her by the kitchen table, nervously writing something down. My dad was sitting opposite her, having scrambled eggs and bacon. "Are you making a shopping list?" I asked. It was the wrong day, but at least she was acting a little normal, even though she was wearing the exact same dress as the day before. My mother smiled and nodded. "Yes, is there anything you need?" "Eggs and milk. We're out of cornflakes, too." She nodded. "Morning, kiddo," Dad said. They were both sitting together, having breakfast, and so I thought that things were back to normal again. He emptied his coffee and got up. "Time for work," he called out. "Oh, honey, could you get some groceries on your way back? Salt, fish, and vinegar, please?" Again, my father and I exchanged a look of confusion. Well, the one of mine was the one of confusion, but his look seemed to be of distress. I nodded to silently tell him that I had things under control. Dad nodded back and then proceeded to head for the door. "Of course, honey." On Wednesday, I found her in the garden digging up dirt, the exact opposite of what we would normally be doing on that day. She was digging a hole big and wide, and I simply couldn't say what on earth she might need it for. Dad was gone before I had woken him up, so I couldn't talk to him, but I promised myself I would do so tonight. Something was wrong with my mother. At first I was worried, but I started getting scared, both for her and of her. "Is something wrong?" my father asked that evening. It was difficult to find a moment alone. Mom always seemed to be somehow around. I hated that I had to get away from her to voice my concerns, but I was worried that she wasn't entirely stable. "She didn't do anything she normally does. And did you see that hole outside, Dad?" I paused for a moment. I think she might really need help." Dad tilted his head and looked through the window to the garden. I suppose he hadn't seen the hole out there earlier. "I won't go to work tomorrow. Stay here with you. Is that all right?" I sighed in relief. Together we might be able to figure out what was going on, and maybe he could start a conversation with her. "Yes, thanks, Dad. I think that would be really helpful." Thursday, I found Mom in the garden again. Normally that wouldn't be so strange, as I would usually find her there hanging up the sheets. However, this Thursday it was stormy outside. It had been raining all morning, and it didn't appear as if it would end anytime soon. "What are you doing? It's pouring cats and dogs!" I shouted from the garden door. Dad, who heard me shouting, had appeared behind me and was holding my shoulder. "No cats and dogs. Fish!" Mom turned around and laughed. And that is when we saw what she was really doing out there. She was hanging the chopped off heads of the fish Dad had brought on the clothesline. "Mom?" I could only bring out a whisper. "Something is wrong. We need to help her." Before I could move, Dad was already running outside and guiding my mother back to our living room. Thursday turned into Friday without a moment of sleep, at least for me. I couldn't close my eyes without heads of fish appearing in front of my mind, and the sight of my mother in that same damn dress and that plastered-on smile. Tired and exhausted, I stumbled down the stairs to find my parents both sitting in front of the television. I didn't even bother talking to them and went straight to the kitchen. For the first time in years, there was no sweet smell coming from it. No, instead, the stench of vinegar made its way to my nose. We had hardly any food in the house. I suppose Mum had completely forgotten about it, and Dad didn't want to leave her in her current stage. He hardly left her side anymore. Without talking to them, I started with all the chores of the past days, wrote a shopping list. I cleaned and threw some clothes in the washing machine. This might sound as if I only wanted my mother to get back to doing the household, but I swear it had nothing to do with that. I simply was worried because she wasn't herself anymore. The following morning, all the items that I wrote on the list were sitting in paper bags on the kitchen counter. I assumed that Dad had gotten out to buy them. On Saturday, she did the most terrifying thing so far. A sight I will not be able to delete from my mind anytime soon. It started only in the evening. The entire day, both my parents were acting normal. Mom even cooked, and we sat around the table talking and laughing. She did most of the talking, and I could even sworn she was entirely herself again. Or she had learned to adapt, at least in some ways. One night, however, everything turned entirely messed up. I woke up from the sound of a loud clatter and immediately jumped out of bed. I had been a nervous wreck lately, and it didn't take much to startle me. The sound was coming from downstairs, and my initial thought was that someone had broken in. But then I heard my mother humming something downstairs. "Mom?" I called out. "Go to bed, child," she shouted back, but I was already making my way to the stairs. She had painted the walls with strange anagrams using red paint. Still wearing the same dress, she looked up and smiled, but this time it appeared far less sincere. I believe I even saw a twitch in her eye. Dad was sitting on a chair next to her. "Mom, we need to get you help. I'll call the hospital, okay?" No, I will help," Dad said, and took the paint can from her hand. A tear rolled down her cheek, but the smile never disappeared. "Why, thank you, honey." "Families help each other," Dad smiled back. "Yes, well, I should go and buy more paint. The child will help me," Mom said. Dad glanced at me. "What the fuck? It's the middle of night." "Look, Mom, I'm really sorry, but..." She held my mouth shut with her hand before I could say another word. "We have to buy paint. Any normal mother and a child would do just that. It's of other importance for a decent home." Dad looked around at the red paint on the wall and on my mother's face, and finally said the last thing I expected. "That sounds perfectly reasonable. See you soon, honey." I had no idea what to do. It seemed that both my parents had lost their minds, but I couldn't possibly let my mother leave on her own, or let her drive a car in that state. So I went outside with her and sat behind the steering wheel with the intention to drive her to a hospital. However, as soon as I started driving, I couldn't for the life of me remember what direction I had to go. "Just keep going straight, follow the street," my mother finally said. Her smile had disappeared and her leg was shaking. "Just keep going, honey." I had no idea what to say, and so I kept going straight until we had left the neighborhood and the surrounding area as well. We found ourselves on the freeway. When I couldn't hold it in anymore, I found the nearest exit and stopped. My mother was trembling, and in the dark light, with the splatters of red paint on her face, I finally realized that I might have made a huge mistake. "Mom?" I hardly brought out the word. She opened her mouth, but no words came out at first. She swallowed and then finally spoke. "I am so sorry, my love. I didn't want to believe it. It made no sense." "What are you talking about?" She looked at me as if I was the one losing my mind. "That thing in there, that was not your father. Didn't you notice? At first I thought I would only act slightly different to see if he would notice that something was off. But it only copied whatever we were doing or saying. She took a deep breath. I woke up a few times at night. It never sleeps. It sits in the bed with its eyes open, waiting for us to wake up. I'm so sorry. I just couldn't believe it at first. I thought maybe something was wrong with your father. We should have left or called for help, but she stayed silent for a moment. My memories were blurry, and I had to make sure first. Make sure that it was him and not me. My palms wouldn't stop sweating, and my head started racing like crazy. This whole week I had been so focused on my mother, I didn't notice that Dad only agreed to the things I was saying. He didn't do anything. And suddenly it felt as if something shattered in my mind. My mother had always been a little peculiar, especially after my father passed away. Mom, that wasn't our home, was it? I gulped. How did we end up there? She looked at me, a reflection of my own fear and confusion. I have absolutely no idea. It must have somehow lured us in there and made us forget. Written by Reddit user Like I Did. I spelled E-Y-E. I hope everyone enjoyed that first story. Definitely a good one to start off the creepiness here. But yeah, that was about, I guess, a demon or something, who knows what the father really was. But I really liked that twist at the end, when you find out that the dad was dead. So this one is a little bit of a longer one, but I really think you'll enjoy the creepiness of it. But the story the next story that we have for tonight is called "My Wife Bought a Reborn Doll to Cope with the Death of Our Child." My child died after only 1 month on this earth. I'm going to spare myself the tears on explaining how, but the tears of my wife are the ones I'll never forget. Grief is ugly. It's so fucking ugly. When we lost him, it sounded as if my wife was regurgitating fragments of her soul. Her wails could have shattered glass, curdled blood. The cries would turn to screams, screams at the universe, at whichever sick, twisted higher power would let this happen. At herself, at me. She'd scream until the skin of her throat shredded to ribbons. I'll be honest, I didn't cry. I don't remember if I even shed a tear. But not because I wasn't upset. I didn't cry because it felt like she was already doing it for me. No pain is more shared than a grieving mother's cry. I wish there was a handbook on grief. A for dummies, if you will. One that could have especially prepared me for the before and the after. Before, you're just waiting, like you're watching an hourglass of life on its last grain. My heart is pumping while he flatlines, and it hits like a wave. I'm going to have to grieve, I thought to myself. Before I could even experience it, I thought about how it was coming right for me. And I knew that in the blink of an eye, life was going to be something that I'd have to fight for. Maybe I was already grieving him before he went. Maybe I was prepared. Or I just thought I was. I don't think you could ever be prepared. Oops, sorry. Then you reach the after. Not the moment you leave the hospital room or even the drive home. It's the moment you open that front door. The air sucked out of the room. And you feel that thorough fucking void. That void in your chest, in your relationship, in your home. This is it. This is my life now. This is real. What hurt even more was that this new life wasn't so foreign to me. It was one I had nearly a month ago. I felt so guilty for not grieving him, but instead grieving for what he could have been. I grieved for the first birthday and dozens after it, the first steps, the graduations. I'd even trade a hormonal teen fight with him over this. I couldn't help but grieve the life he could have had instead of the one we had lost. My wife felt differently. She missed their skin touching, humming to him, even dragging herself out of bed at 3 a.m. because he was crying again. We never really discussed it, but we could just tell that we were grieving down two separate paths. Our backs were always turned in bed. She'd flinched when I touched her. It was as if she was allergic to me, but I understood she needed her space. The funeral was absolute hell on earth. Actually, I think rotting in the fiery pits of hell would feel better than attending an infant's funeral. At least it'd be warm, unlike the icy grip of mourning. I remember walking up to the casket alone, staring down at him. All I could think was, caskets should not be that small. He laid in a box that was small enough to cradle in my arms. When they lowered him into the ground, the cries emerged again. My wife wailed into the clear morning sky. So guttural, it was as if it was happening all over again. But she didn't collapse into my arms. She collapsed to the ground as if she wanted to join him. Then you open the front door again, and the voids are even deeper. Everything is even realer. We packed up our child's nursery and his future into boxes, then fought about whether or not to throw it all out. She said she wanted them in the attic. I said I'd never be able to go up there again if we did. So we just left it all in that room collecting dust. The doors stayed shut at all times, but never locked, just closed. I think it symbolized our grief in a way. We closed the door on that part of our lives, but we weren't ready to lock it away forever. Each day it doesn't get easier. It just gets farther away from the day it happened. The mornings are the worst. You wake up, your eyes creak open. The morning sun is pouring through your window. And then you remember that you're grieving, as if you could forget. Little things began to tick us off. One of us would forget to do the dishes, and it'd end up with someone sleeping on the couch or taking a long midnight drive. We tried couples therapy, but we needed so much more therapy than that. It wasn't even about us, it was about him. The wedge in our life was him. I was at my wit's end with how to deal with this, but it appeared that my wife was one step ahead of me when I heard a soft humming from our bedroom after I came home from work. My brows furrow as I made my way upstairs. The last time I heard her hum this tune was at the hospital, right before the heart rate monitor hummed back. When I pushed the cracked open door, I felt like I was dreaming. She was laying in our bed, cradling a baby in her arms, looking down at it like she could see every planet, every star, every galaxy. I remember pinching my thigh as I stared at her, the slight pain stinging. She was so engrossed by it I could have stood there till the end of time and she wouldn't have noticed. Honey? She finally looked up. Oh, hi. She stretched a smile that had become so foreign. What are you holding? Oh, this? It's a reborn doll. I raised a brow at her. They're realistic dolls for mothers to help me cope. She nodded rapidly, her smile weakening. It was as if I had disrupted the fantasy by just asking. Oh. I couldn't help but stare at it, and stare at her because of the way she'd stare at it, as if she was holding her own flesh and blood and not plastic. Has it helped? I've only had it for a few hours now, but it's comforting. It rubbed me the wrong way at first, but if nothing else was working, I was glad if this would. Do you want to hold him? Suddenly, I felt myself at a crossroads. I didn't know if I could hold a doll and give her the reaction she wanted. I can't look at it like it's my son. But I knew this wasn't just about me. So I hesitantly walked over and stretched my arms out. A slight chill ran down my spine as its cold skin was placed onto my palms. I pulled it close and cradled it, staring down at it. And suddenly I crumbled into tears. It felt too fucking real. I dropped to my knees as it laid in my shaking arms, my scrunched face already wet. I knew it wasn't actually my son, but I realized how much I missed this, not just the moments we had lost. My wife patiently waited as I wailed with my head hung. I let out cries I never knew I could, my voice cracking with each ugly sob. After that day, I noticed things getting better. It didn't fill the voids, but something else stood inside of them for a while, just to keep them dormant. Whenever she had one of those days where standing on her own 2 feet didn't feel worth it, she'd hold it, hum to it. Sometimes she'd pretend to breastfeed it. I will admit it still creeped me out to some extent. It was comforting in a way, but I knew it wasn't him. And I think this is when the wedge grew deeper. One day I came home, and as I walked upstairs, my entire body locked as I saw light leaking out of a door. That door. I knew it was unlocked, but I never expected either of us to ever open it, at least not so soon. I swallowed roughly as I approached it. Slowly opening the door revealed empty boxes and a full nursery. She had set everything up again. I observed the room as I stepped in, a feeling of concern weighing on me. Then I noticed something in the crib. I wrapped my fingers around the railing and leaned in, my brows furrowing as I saw the doll laying there. I didn't hear you come in. My body jolted as I whipped around. Jesus! Sorry, you... What is this? What? What is this? Our nursery? Well, yeah, but why is everything unboxed? Our baby needs a nursery. We stared at each other with accusations of insanity. Look, I've researched these dolls, and I understand how this helps you. I'll admit it's helped me a bit too, but this? You know this isn't our what? Suddenly I was tongue-tied. I'm just concerned. I unpacked all of this myself. I'll put it all back when I want to, okay? She said slowly and sternly, daggers shooting from her eyes. I could feel a million words crawling up my throat, but the only thing that came out was, okay. I think I need some alone time with him. I nodded, looking away as I slipped past her. I was trying to be patient with her, I really was, but I just couldn't meet her at the lengths she was going. Pretending this is our kid may help her, but it only made me feel worse. That night, not a word was exchanged under those sheets. I was turned towards the window, and she was turned towards the baby monitor that she put new batteries in. After making faces out of the moon, I eventually fell asleep. Suddenly, in the middle of the night, I felt myself drift away from my dream and wake up. My eyes slowly creaked open, the dim moonlight coming in through the window. The room was silent, except for the cries that came through the baby monitor. I sat up and rubbed my eyes, staring at the monitor as staticky cries emitted from the speaker. Liv? Wake up! I shook my wife till she groaned out of her slumber. She lifted her sleeping mask and looked at the monitor. My eyes darted toward her, then back at the monitor. She sighed, tossed her mask onto the dresser, and stood up. I'll handle him. Get some sleep. I stared at her, wide-eyed. My throat knotted as she tiredly walked out of the room. As she stepped into the nursery, I began to hear her over the speaker. Shh, it's okay. I blinked like a deer in headlights as I listened to her hum, the crying slowing to a stop. My eyes shifted towards the door as she walked back in, grabbed her sleeping mask, and laid back down. She didn't say a word as I just continued to stare. A part of me wanted to go into the nursery, but I just laid there till my eyes dried and ran bloodshot. Before I knew it, the sun was up and I had to go to work. I slowly stood up and stiffly got ready. I tried to convince myself that it was a dream, but I had already woken up from one. When I finished getting dressed, I kissed her as she slept and left the room. As I passed the nursery, I paused for a moment. At first, I considered going in, but instead I pressed my ear against the door. But there was nothing. Just absolute silence. I don't know what I thought I was going to hear. I didn't even know what I heard last night. I couldn't tell if hearing something now would have made me feel more or less insane. That day at work was grueling. I kept falling asleep at my desk, had a hard time processing what people were even saying to me. It was just one big blur. When I got home, the first thing I wanted to ask my wife was what the fuck happened last night. But after the incident in the nursery, I feared she'd tell me that the doll crying is normal because it's our son. When I got home, I was ready to fall flat on my face. My wife stood at the sink washing dishes, her head turning as I walked in. Hey, hun. Hi. How was work? Usual. Be quiet when you go upstairs. I just put him down and it wasn't without a fight. She chuckled. I'll be sure not to wake him. I anxiously cleared my throat as she quickly glared at me, then looked away. At least I was trying to play along. I quietly walked upstairs, minimizing the creaks of each step. As I passed the door, I could feel my breathing and heartbeat halt to a stop. Something about it just always knocked the wind out of me. Dinner was so silent, you could hear a pin falling before it even dropped. Chewing and sipping filled the dense quiet. I was thinking of taking him to a mommy and me class. I looked up. My chewing slowed. Is that... Sounds good. I bit my tongue and smiled. I couldn't tell if she was being serious or if she just wanted to talk. I also wish you'd spend more time with him. You avoid the nursery like a plague. She laughed weakly. I'll make sure to do that. Thank you. Watching her eat, the look on her face, I could tell she could barely get the food down her throat. She was trying. She was really fucking trying. I felt guilty for not being more understanding. It was hard to accept that we were just going to be grieving in different ways no matter what. But I was at a crossroads when it felt like our grief couldn't help each other. But the one thing that was itching at the back of my mind was last night. It was crying. How could it be crying? And it didn't seem to surprise her either. I tried to make any logical reasoning for it. Maybe she set an alarm with a baby crying sound? Or maybe there's a speaker inside of it. Something to make it feel realer? It was possible, except for one other thing. It sounded so much like him. If you're not a parent, a baby crying is just a baby crying. But I could pick out those cries from a crowd. Maybe it's just grief playing mind games, I couldn't tell. Later that night, after brushing my teeth, I was walking to our bedroom when I noticed my wife in the nursery. She was slowly rocking back and forth in the rocking chair, humming to it. Hey, I finally got him to sleep, she said after noticing me hovering in the doorway. That's good. Come say goodnight. I stared for a moment before forcing myself to enter the room. She stood up and walked over to the crib, then gently placed it back down. She leaned down, kissed his forehead, then turned to me. I glanced at her, then at it. I could tell she was expecting me to do the same. I hesitantly leaned towards it, my lips puckered. Suddenly, as I got closer, a pungent smell entered my nostrils. I tried to ignore it, but I recoiled as I got closer, the foul stench growing stronger. My wife glared at me in horror as I gagged, clasping my hand to my mouth. What the fuck is wrong with you? I'm sorry. Him! Not it! Him! Okay. He smells like a fucking dumpster fire. What, does he have built-in fecal mechanics too? Tears welled in her eyes as I looked away with guilt, my entire body shaking. Just admit that this is a joke to you. You think I'm embarrassing myself, that I'm crazy. Just say it! Liv, no. Actually, don't. Just sleep somewhere else tonight. The couch, the fucking sidewalk, I don't care. Okay. I flew out of the room before I could burst into tears of fury. I felt like such a fucking monster. Prioritizing both of our healing was just tearing me apart. It was tearing us apart. I curled up on the couch and screamed in the pillow, leaving tear stains on the cover. I sobbed until it exhausted me, eventually knocking me out. All of a sudden, All of a sudden I was ripped from my slumber at the sound of glass shattering. My body jolting awake. I quickly sat up, my eyes darting around in a blur, throwing the blanket off of me. I stood up and searched for the source of the sound. The room was pitch black as I ran my hand along the wall to find a light switch. Suddenly, my eyes shot open as something sharp impaled the bottom of my foot. Fuck! Shit! I hissed to myself as I lifted my foot. Now I was hopping around till I found a light switch, while also avoiding glass that I couldn't see. Eventually, I found one and illuminated the kitchen. I looked down at my foot, a small train of blood drops behind me. I lifted it up, blood leaking down my skin. It was a small shard of porcelain. So I pursed my lips, took a deep breath, bit my cheek, and yanked it out. I swallowed a scream as I placed the crimson-coated shard on the kitchen counter. Then I noticed some white powder on the bottom of my foot as well. I limped around the kitchen, soon finding a shattered cookie jar and an open flour bag spilled across the floor. God fucking damn it. I quickly tied an unused dish rag around my foot and began picking up the shards. The stress of the cut and the mess overshadowed the thought of how it even fell in the first place. But this thought came front and center when I noticed small flour-coated footprints leading out of the kitchen. I slowly placed the last shard in the trash as my eyes stared under furrowed brows. I limped over and kneeled down, observing them closely. They looked like... no, impossible. I told myself it was impossible. But who else could have feet that small? It wasn't my wife, and it certainly wasn't an animal. An uneasiness clouded over me as I quickly vacuumed it up. The trail I had left was longer than I realized as I exited the kitchen and made my way through the living room. Eventually, I reached the stairs, noticing the footprints went up them too. My eyes slowly glided up and stared deeply into the dark hallway. I was able to at least try and logically explain the crying the other night, but I couldn't make anything of this. I took a deep breath and slowly made my way up the stairs. With each footprint that vanished into the vacuum added one more beat to my pounding heart. When I reached the top step, I realized the trail led even further. I continued to follow it, taking the curve that ended at the door. That door. I slowly stood up, my heavy, shaking breaths hitting the wood. But I couldn't bring myself to go in. I just wanted to cry, feeling like I was being haunted by my own grief. I could have been standing there for a minute or for an hour. Either way, it felt like forever before I finally stepped away and entered the bathroom. I held back tears as I made sure there wasn't any glass left in my foot, then properly bandaged it. With everything that had happened and was happening, all I could think of, why us? Why me? I just wanted to be a husband, a father, a family. Why does life's unfairness have to be so cruel? It's more than just not getting what you want. It's losing what you love. It's your son dying after only a month of being. It's not unfair. It's just cruel. So fucking cruel. After securing the bandage, I limped out of the bathroom, my body weighing with exhaustion. Then I halted in front of the nursery door, my eyes scrunching shut as the sound of crying suddenly came from behind it. Never in my life have I prayed, not even for my son. It felt like shouting into a void, but at that moment I prayed. I prayed for it to end. I needed it to end. But nobody was listening. Life wasn't that fair. I should have known that. I opened my eyes, tears welling in them, and kept walking past it. The cries grew fainter as there was a ceiling between us, but I could still hear them. I could feel them crying for Daddy as I laid my heavy head on the couch pillow. I had hoped that my wife would wake up and deal with it, but she never did. The entire night I laid there, the tears drying against my cheeks as I relentlessly cried. My psyche was shattering piece by piece as it grew impossible to even keep a grasp on reality or try and figure out what the fuck was going on while its screams filled my ears and bounced around in my skull. At that point, I just wanted to die, or at least just be numb. To have the ability to not give a single fuck about anything happening, even if just for 5 seconds, would have helped me sleep that night. By the time it was morning, the crying had stopped. At some point, but I don't remember when. "Jack," my wife suddenly said, her hand resting on my shoulder. I jolted, my head whipping towards her. "Oh, didn't mean to scare you." "It's fine, I just didn't sleep." I could see guilt hanging on her expression. "Is everything all right?" "I want to apologize for last night. You've been very patient with me, and I feel like I've been asking you for more than you can handle." We paused in silence for a moment, our eyes shifting around each other. "I appreciate it. I'm sorry too. I've been judgmental. We don't have to be on the same page to care about each other." She sat down next to me and rested her head on my shoulder. I kissed the top of her head and enjoyed the quiet with her. "I wanted to bring up what I saw last night, but figured now wasn't the right time. And about the smell, you weren't wrong. I went to go see him this morning and it hit me like a truck." She chuckled weakly. "Turns out he was molding on the inside, which can happen, apparently. I reached out to the seller and she said that it happens due to poor upkeep." Suddenly she broke into tears, collapsing into my chest. I held her close as her tears soaked through my shirt. "How did I manage to lose him twice?" My heart shattered. "It's okay. It's okay. You can always get a new one." "No, I can't!" I looked into her eyes with deep concern. "Olivia? Can we speak honestly for a moment, with no hard feelings?" She slowly nodded. "It's a doll. You can get a new one." Even then I pushed the wrong buttons as she ripped herself from my arms and stormed upstairs. "You don't get it. You never did. You know what? No, that's not fucking fair. None of this is fucking fair." Before I could get another word in, she was already in our bedroom, the door slamming behind her. I buried my face in my hands as I drew deep, slow breaths. Everyone always said grief brings people together, but all this is doing is tearing everything apart. My marriage, myself, my understanding of what's real and what isn't. I spent another work day in a complete daze. I even got reprimanded by my boss for lack of work ethic. When I got home, I was met with a distraught wife. She was definitely still mad at me, so I considered whether or not to even ask if she was okay. "Hey, hun, are you alright?" I threw him out. "Oh, I'm so sorry." "Are you?" "Liv." Surprised you didn't say thank God. "Look, I'm sorry about this morning, but I'm trying, and I know you know that, but it's hard when you keep flying off the handle. Do you want to see somebody? A grief counselor?" He was my grief counselor. That's why I'm getting another one, just like you said, right? "Right. Whatever works for you." I smiled weakly. She sipped her coffee with a daze in her eye, like she could see something that wasn't there. Just by looking at her, you could tell she was dangling at the edge. But I couldn't pry and prod anymore, for her sake and mine. She let me sleep in our bed in that night, but we didn't exchange any more words than goodnight. I could feel the back of her ankles against my leg. At some point, she even turned towards me in her sleep. But she didn't want to touch me. She needed just enough space, and I let her have it. A night without it in the house gave me the best sleep I had since he died. I woke up feeling refreshed for once, but I quickly noticed the emptiness next to me. She must have gotten up early. As I left the bedroom, my brows furrowed as I heard humming from behind the nursery door. Excuse me. My puzzled expression twisted further as I saw my wife cradling it in her arms. "Good morning. I thought you had to get rid of him." "Good morning. And I did. This is the new one." She smiled. "Wow, already? So fast." "Express shipping," she shrugged with a chuckle. "Sweet. I'm going to try and put him down for his nap. Could you brew me a cup?" "Yeah, sure." I smiled before closing the door behind me. The second she couldn't see me anymore, I stood absolutely baffled. Something about it just seemed off. Hold on, sorry, 1 second. I just noticed the sound, the audio was done. How could she have gotten a new one that quickly? It didn't add up. She had gotten so attached to it. The thought of her wanting to keep it, no matter the mold, didn't surprise me. What hurt the most is that she lied to me. After filling the steaming mugs, I set them down at the table and read the news on my phone as I waited for her to come down. He didn't put up a fight, thank God. She sighed with relief as she trotted downstairs. That's good. I sipped my coffee, keeping my eyes on the screen. She sat across from me, taking slow steps as she stared off in a daze again. I occasionally glanced up at her, watching her tap her finger against the mug and bite her cheek. Are you all right? She laughed at the question, circling her mug around the rim of the mug. Weather's nice today, she responded. It is. Maybe you should spend some time outside. You could take him out for a walk. Yeah, that sounds nice. Her words trailed off like she was dreaming. I helped her take out the baby carriage that we never got to use, and watched with unease as she laid the doll in it. Hope you two have a nice time, I smiled. We'll be back soon. We quickly kissed before she was out the door, and finally I could breathe. It was only a mere few hours, but it was still time to breathe. It was also time to think. The past few nights I had experienced things that were beyond what I thought grief would be like. I knew it'd be haunting, but not like this. I never really believed in the supernatural. I'd say I'm a skeptical person, but after the constant crying, the footprints, I couldn't make any logic out of it. I'd run in circles to death before it made any actual sense. And my wife seems to know more than she's letting on, but I was scared that one more question would push her out the door. I couldn't lose her too. But now our grief wasn't just going down two different paths. It was going in completely opposite directions. She needed the doll to heal, and I needed it gone to heal. But I didn't know how to get rid of it without hurting her in the process. I thought about tossing it and making her believe she misplaced it, but that just felt cruel. I didn't need to put her under any more distress. By the time she got back, I hadn't really moved off of square one. I still understood nothing. I figured out nothing. I was just aching even more. Are you feeling better? Yeah, it was nice to get some sun. This little guy enjoyed it too. Didn't you? Didn't you? She gushed. I couldn't help but feel so uncomfortable watching her treat it like it was our son. But it's her way of coping, and I had to respect that. To at least put myself at some ease, I told myself that I'm just under a lot of stress, that my grieving mind is just playing tricks on me. I guessed being tormented by him was better than never seeing him again. That night she laid close to me, our legs intertwined as she fell asleep against me, her arm across my chest. I missed her warmth so much. I thought his death had cooled her touch, but she was still so warm, so comforting. It was easy falling asleep that night with her against me, like a child and their favorite stuffed animal. But I was stupid to forget that life isn't unfair. It's cruel. In the middle of the night, I was awoken by the sound of the screams again. Excuse me. I was awoken again by the cries over the baby monitor again. Only this time, as my eyes opened, I realized I couldn't move anything else. My heart pounded as I drew in panicked breaths. My jaw merely trembled as I attempted to speak. Pleas for help caught in my throat. A tear streamed down the side of my face as I waited for my wife to wake up, but she didn't. I was locked on that bed, unable to do nothing but listen to its cries. I wanted to scream, sob, punch a fucking wall, but I could do absolutely nothing. Suddenly, the speaker cut out, its cries halting with a staticky screech. My trembling breaths filled the silent room as my body stayed frozen on the bed. I couldn't even squeeze out a groan to try and wake her. Then, the sound of the door creaking open came from the hallway, and the cries began again, not from over the speaker, but from the hallway. Its cries sounded distorted. They were deeper, more drawn out, and they sent goosebumps from head to toe. I scrunched my eyes as I begged to be able to move, the crying nearing closer. Then, the bedroom door slowly opened, the deep cries filling up the room. I looked over at my wife, who was somehow still asleep. I wondered if this was even happening outside of my own head. I couldn't see it, but I could tell it was moving closer, and with each step its cries grew deeper. It reached the point that it sounded like it was gargling on its own blood. When it stood by my ear, its sobs were deafening. Now I couldn't move and I couldn't hear anything besides this suffocating, dizzying crying that made me feel like I was drowning in molten tar. Dad, Dad, it gurgled. And just like that, I felt my entire body unlock, and a scream worth 1,000 screams exited my mouth like a dam breaking open. The sound waves rippled my throat as I scatteredly threw myself off the bed and into the corner of the room. Jesus Christ! My wife shouted as she finally woke up, ripping off her sleeping mask and turning the lamp on. I let out wails of pure terror as I balled up in the corner, my body tremoring. My God, what happened? He was... I could barely squeeze a word out in between sobs. Jesus. She hopped off the bed and kneeled next to me, my body flinching as she reached for me. What happened? I slowly turned to her, my eyes gaping wide. Instead of saying a word, I stumbled to my feet and made my way out of the bedroom. Where are you going? What happened? Jack! I ignored her calls as I threw the nursery door open. My eyes darted around as I searched for it. Then I realized it was in the crib. Jack, what are you doing? I'm not doing this anymore. Jack, can we talk about this? She gasped in horror as I yanked it out of the crib. You're right, Olivia. This isn't a doll. This is a fucking parasite, and I want it gone. Jack, please, that's our son. No, it's fucking not. She winced as I screamed. Stop, please, she begged, tears pouring down her face as I began rapidly shaking in front of her face. This isn't our son. Then, in one final burst of rage, I gripped it by its throat and slammed it to the ground with all of my might. In this moment, I realized that I learned two things from the death of my son. Caskets aren't supposed to be that small, and reborn dolls aren't supposed to have internal organs. My wife crumbled to her knees as she let out those cries, the ones I could never forget. My breathing and heartbeat practically stopped, my body shutting down for a moment as I stared at the spilled, graying organs and mushy skin that she attempted to cup in her trembling hands. I slowly looked up at her, utter horror hanging on my expression. Olivia, what is this? He didn't belong down there. He belongs with me. With us. And that was the end of My Wife Bought a Reborn Doll to Help with the Cope of Our Unborn Son. And that was written by Sugarfruit33 on Reddit. A little bit of a... little less scary and more of a... well, a little bit of, spirit, but also a little bit of creep factor of a grieving mother who just couldn't handle the loss of her son, which is very sad as well. So yeah, we have two stories left that I'm going to be reading tonight before sending us off on our way. But I really hope you enjoyed that creepy doll. And that one, I think what's scary about that one is thinking about it. Truthfully, imagine if, I don't know, if Caitlin brought in a creepy fucking baby doll that looked... First of all, if I heard sounds that, here's the problem I have with both of the characters in that story. The second I hear that baby doll crying, I'd be like, honey, why is the baby doll crying? She goes, there's a sound box in it. I'd probably just be like, how about we just don't? How about that? There are plenty of ways you can grieve, honey. But putting a sound box that sounds like our infant son crying, and then to go and put it back to sleep? I don't think I would do that. I would hope the baby wouldn't die, but I think the point of the matter is, if I heard the baby doll cry, I'd be like, can we not have it cry, please? Makes me a little uncomfortable. And then if I saw footprints, I'm burning that fucking house to the ground, including the doll. Because obviously that means that baby doll can move. I would have shattered it. I think he had every right to shatter it. Especially the fact of knowing that she put the organs of their infant. Does that mean she dug up their infant? What did she do? That's what I want to know. Did she dig up her child? Or did she, like, take the organs from the funeral home to put in the doll? Like, see, so many questions I have. But the real point of the matter is, I would have said something a lot sooner to my wife. Like, honey, is this necessary? But, yeah. Let us continue, though. Back into our spooky tales. Because, like I said, we got 2 left. They're both, I think this one's longish. I don't think it's too long. The last one's a little shorter, in my opinion. We'll see. Doesn't matter. Length or anything like that. Obviously, I just appreciate having everyone here listening or tuning in later at a later date if you're listening to the recording. And if you hear me talking about any images and you're just listening in, because like I said, I'm thinking about putting this on Spotify. Every Saturday it's live streamed and it's also on YouTube, the video. So if you're tuning into this at a later date and you hear me describing pictures, or there haven't been a lot of pictures yet. I just showed some vinyls off, and I think I did a good job at describing those. But yeah. In the meantime, let's get back into the stories, into the immersion. And this story that we're about to embark on is called Drive Safe. My ex always hated our dog, but he probably would have taken her too if she weren't so ugly. If Lulu were one of those cute mini golden doodles or corgis, or even one of those goofy-looking dogs that are charming in their ugliness, think Danny DeVito or Steve Buscemi, only in dog version. Then I have no doubt he would have claimed ownership of her too, along with everything else in our apartment. But Lulu is just a plain old ugly dog, and for that and so much else about her, I'm forever grateful. I don't want to talk about my ex too much here because this isn't about him. But I do need to explain why I was traveling across the country in the middle of the night with my few worldly possessions loaded up in the back of a bumpy U-Haul van. My wife and I had been together 6 years, never married. He said marriage was outdated. I said fine. Was I upset by that? Yes and no. Well, mainly yes, but I kept quiet. I loved him. 5 months ago, he tells me he wants to split up. He said it just like that. I want to split up. No shaking of the hands, no tears in his eyes, not even a change in the tone of his voice. I was in the kitchen when it happened, eating honey bunches of oats for breakfast. He was standing in the hall. I want to split up, he said, and then he grabbed his bag and left for work, leaving me to sob as my cereal got soggy in the bowl. Lulu heard me crying and nuzzled her snout in my lap. She whimpered along with me as the hours went by. I skipped work that day, sat on the couch and watched the sunlight pass over the walls of the apartment I'd always thought of as our home together. The thing is, my ex made way more money than me. He was happy to cover the bulk of the rent, he said. Happy to buy the furniture, happy to lease the new car for us, happy to pay for this and that, loading up our apartment with nice things. When the time came for me to move all the things that were actually mine out of the place, I realized I had even less than I did 6 years ago. It all barely filled the U-Haul van. I didn't have a couch or chairs. Those were on his paper. I didn't have any dishes or silverware. We'd thrown out my old ones when he'd bought a fancy new set a couple years ago. I didn't even have a mattress. He'd gotten us an expensive memory foam king size. I remembered I'd always wanted to let Lulu hop on the bed to snuggle while we watched movies in our room. My ex wouldn't hear of it. "Stop treating the dog like it's a person," he said. "She's lucky she gets to even live inside the apartment with us." I was the one who got Lulu from the pound, back when she was a puppy. She's a street dog, or she was, until the people from animal control swept her up one day as she'd been rummaging through an overturned trash can. You can tell she's got a good amount of pit bull in her, but beyond that she's an all-American mutt with a big boulder of a head, a weirdly thin body and stumpy legs. She waddles more than walks, and she snores like crazy, but she's a total sweetheart. When she sees kids, she lies on her bellies and waits until they get close before she gives them kisses. We didn't even train her to do that. One afternoon about a year or so ago, Lulu came up behind my ex and licked his ankles, and he turned and gave her a small kick right in the head. It wasn't enough to hurt Lulu, but that was when I should have known. Looking back, it's amazing how much you can convince yourself someone is who they're not. So the U-Haul was packed, I'd quit my hourly job, and I was now on the road toward my sister's place in Spartanburg, South Carolina, where I'd been promised a place to stay for the time being. It was a 10-plus hour drive, just Lulu and me in the front of the van as we rumbled through the endless pastoral of farmland and cow towns. I purposefully decided to take the smaller highway to avoid traffic, since I was still uncomfortable driving the U-Haul, and the scenery made me glad I did. Tall fast food signs rose up into the sky like totem poles, against clouds so big and white they almost made you want to cry. But I'd promised myself I was done crying, or at least until I'd gotten off the road. I'd had to pack the U-Haul by myself, so it had already been early afternoon by the time I set off. After about 4 hours on the road, the sky began to dim over the highway. Just as the sun sunk beneath the ridges of the mountains in the distance, I heard a loud clang somewhere below my feet. All at once, the U-Haul van started shaking. It felt like the wheel was fighting against me. I kept having to grip it and yank it back straight. I had trouble seeing out of the back window because my stuff was piled high, but I managed to get over to an exit that was just ahead. As I slowed the van down now that I was off the highway, I saw a sign sticking out from the roadway. Richard and Sons Auto Repair, quarter-mile ahead. I know you've probably heard a story like this before. A story where a car breaks down in the middle of nowhere on the back roads highway. A young woman by herself. Maybe she meets a creepy guy in overalls who says something like, "Well, you must be lost, little missy," as he eyes her like she's a good meal he's about to devour. But it really wasn't like that. "Evening, ma'am," said the perfectly normal-looking guy inside the auto repair shop. "How can I help you?" "Oh, and who's this cutie?" he added, taking notice of Lulu at my side. The shop's owner was a man named Richard Meadows, and he was a pleasant, polite, and well-dressed older gentleman. His gray hair neatly combed, and his buttoned shirt starched bright white. He ran the place with his 2 sons, both of whom were waiting in the garage. "My sons Abel and Dean will run diagnostics, then you and I can head into the office to call the U-Haul folks," Richard said as we walked up to them. "Don't want this to be on your tab after all. Abel, want to take the keys?" I handed the keys to the son named Abel, who was a little chubby and pale, his shaved head dotted with moles. He seemed shy and only nodded when he took the keys away from me. I only mentioned Abel's appearance because the other son beside him, Dean, was almost shockingly handsome. He had a thick head of sandy blonde hair, a chiseled jawline, and broad shoulders under his denim work shirt. He was that level of teen movie heartthrob handsome that made my face suddenly hot. Walking with me out to the U-Haul in the lot, Dean took out a clipboard, licking the tip of his pen as he angled it downward. "So the truck just started rattling on you?" he asked. I stuttered through what had happened, feeling like a nervous high school girl again, but he just smiled and nodded the whole time, his voice calm like a doctor at a bedside. Well, I'm sure we'll figure it out. And like my dad said, don't worry, we'll make sure the U-Haul folks pay up, not you." I thanked him, trying to ignore the fact that I was blushing for no reason. "Good thing you've got a bodyguard here with you," Dean added, smiling down at Lulu. "What's his name?" "Her," I said. "And her name is Lulu." "Well, hi there, Lulu." When he reached down to pet her, Lulu stepped back and showed her teeth growling under her breath. "Lulu," I said. "Bad girl." Dean just laughed. Nah, she's cool. Just protecting her mom, right, Lulu? Honestly, I wouldn't trust some random auto repair dude either. No, it's not you. It's just my boyfriend, or I guess my ex-boyfriend now. Yeah, I don't know. I guess he made her a little skittish around guys like you. Dean raised his eyebrows a little, but then he pursed his lip and nodded as if he understood. And I appreciated that he didn't ask anything further about it. He told me to go wait on him, that he'd handled everything from here. When I got back to the office, Dean's father, Richard, had already sorted out the bill with the U-Haul folks. Free and clear, he said. There was nothing else to do but wait for the van to be ready. A TV hanging in the corner was playing a muted episode of Judge Judy. Richard took a seat across from me in the waiting area and petted Lulu, while telling me a little about himself and his family. His wife had died a year and a half ago, he said. Passed suddenly in her sleep, which is a mercy, I suppose. It had been a tough string of months, but he and his sons were close. They were getting him through it. Lulu seemed to sense his sadness, because she showed more attachment to him than most other male strangers. I hope you don't mind me speaking out of turn, Richard said as he stroked Lulu's head. But I'm relieved you have this dog here with you. Why's that? Well, not to scare you, but there have been some incidents. He told me he didn't want to cause any undue worry, but there had been 7 women found dead in the woods beyond the cornfield down the highway over the past year and a half. All the victims were like you, young women, traveling alone, Richard said. So it's good you got this girl here, and he put his face close to Lulu, who licked him on the cheek. Ah, good girl, such a sweetie. I mean, I appreciate you giving me a heads up at least, I said. Sure, and like I said, didn't mean to scare you, probably nothing. No, it's nice of you. You guys have all been really nice, I added. Dean was helpful. That's just the wonderful service and dedication you would expect from the world-famous team at Richard & Sons Auto Repairs. Richard laughed, but I do thank you sincerely. I almost asked if Dean had a girlfriend, and if that weren't a totally crazy and pathetic question to pose to a total stranger. But before I had the chance to embarrass myself, the other son, Abel, shuffled into the office and murmured something to his father. Richard nodded, saying to me, Well, looks like you're all set. No paperwork or anything? Nope, all taken care of. Get you a receipt for insurance purposes, but otherwise you're good to go. Here, let me walk you and Lulu out. On our way out of the office, I debated the merits of giving Dean my number, trying to balance the pros and cons. Was it better to risk wild embarrassment if I get rejected, versus the regret I might feel if I did nothing? I was so new to the single life again that I didn't know how any of this worked anymore. Turns out the decision was made for me because Dean was gone when we got to the van. Dean head off already? Richard asked. Abel nodded. Had a date, he whispered in that whisper-quiet voice of his. Oh, another date? Why am I not surprised? Of course, I thought. And really, what did I expect? Just because Dean was working at some Nowheresville auto repair shop didn't change the fact that he was still wildly handsome and easy to talk to. If anything, girls probably swooned over the fact that he could take a car apart by hand, peeling off his shirt afterwards, his muscle gleaming with sweat, etc., etc. I felt like an idiot. Well, sure was great to meet you, Richard said. And so nice to meet you too, Miss Lulu. His son Abel reached into his pocket and dangled the keys out in front of me, while Richard got down and gave Lulu one last head scratch. I took the keys from Abel and smiled. Thank you, I said. He smiled back, but he didn't break eye contact. And for a split second, a shudder passed through my body. Something I can't explain. Drive safe, he breathed. The back road highway that night was dark. What my sister would call country dark, but what I would call horror movie dark. It seemed the smaller highways like this were only busy during the day, because I only saw a car pass by every few minutes or so. Fields of corn along the roadside swayed under a cloud-choked moon. The night air was punctuated by faraway train whistles, which sounded to me more like muffled screams. I don't know if I was just freaked out by the warning Richard had given me, or if there really was something to be said about this stretch of highway. But I kept getting a feeling as if eyes were staring out at me from the fields. I sensed I was driving into the mouth of a beast already on my way to being digested by the darkness. Up ahead, the cornfields ended and were overtaken by a forest, a dense swath of overgreen trees, and the moment we drove past the fields, Lulu started barking. I swear I almost crashed the car. Oh my god, Lulu! Lulu, calm down! She was going crazy, turning her head side to side as she barked back at whatever we just passed on the side of the road. Lulu, relax, girl! But I couldn't even say that without my own voice choking up. 7 women found dead in the woods beyond the cornfields, Richard had said. My hands felt slippery on the wheel. I'd never been comfortable driving a U-Haul van before, and it didn't help that the darkness seemed to devour the headlamps so that I could barely see a few feet in front of me down the highway. I tried turning on the radio, got static, and turned the dial, but then thought the better of it and shut it off again. Better be silenced just in case... Case what? My mind was going in so many different directions, and even saying there was silence would be wrong, because every few minutes Lulu started up again, pawing at the back seat and the windows, barking like crazy and growling. It was like she was fighting a ghost and wanted to break out of the car. I glanced out the windows but could only see darkness on either side of the road. That, along with the shadowed outlines of trees, stumps, power lines, all of which looked like monsters to me. Eventually we entered South Carolina. We passed out of the rural area, and it was only when the bright flood lamps of passing car dealerships and 24-hour fast food places illuminated the inside of the cabin that Lulu felt silent. But even then, for the last 3 hours of the car ride, she never fully relaxed. Especially when we passed through the occasional pockets of empty rural areas. She seemed stressed. Occasionally, she'd perk up, as if she'd seen someone outside our window, floating along with us. Her body language would stiffen. By now, I just let it happen. I told myself she was just tense from traveling. She seemed desperate by the end of the trip. I could tell she was exhausted. She hadn't slept all night. I was exhausted too. Lulu's howls and barks had kept me alert, but it hadn't exactly done well for keeping my eyes on the road. I felt the kind of twitchy panic that usually came from drinking too much coffee, my eyes darting from side to side, feeling like I was about to crash into something any minute. My sister had texted me before she went to bed and told me the key was under the mat. It was around 3 a.m. when I pulled up to the curb outside her house and put the van in park. When I did, Lulu shut up. Okay, yes, we're here, girl. You can relax now. In the glow of the van's cab, as I reached over to grab my night bag, I could hear Lulu breathing deeply. She was taking fast and muffled breaths, panting. It sounded like she was trying to catch her breath after running. Hey, chill out, I said as I grabbed my bag and sat up again. What are you panting for, girl? We're already... I froze. Lulu was totally still behind me. She was pacing the back of the van. Her mouth was closed. Her tongue wasn't hanging out. Her chest wasn't rising and falling. She was calm and focused, breathing slowly and silently. It wasn't her. It wasn't her breathing at all. It was coming from somewhere in the back of the van. Just then, Lulu showed her teeth and growled. Oh, okay, girl, I said, trying to keep my voice normal. I was shaking. I could barely feel my body. I was floating outside of it. Let's head on inside now. Come on. I fumbled with the door handle. I almost fell when I stepped out. I tried taking out my phone and dialing 911, but my hand was shaking so bad I couldn't even unlock my home screen. Lulu hopped out and circled me. She was on high alert. Her head was low and she moved like a predator, keeping close to my legs. I walked backwards with her up the driveway, but she stayed between me and the van, pacing quickly from side to side. I managed to get my phone unlocked. I was about to hit the emergency call button when I heard something move inside the van. A metallic click. The back door, I realized. I locked it, but it could still open from the inside. The street was dark, only one lamppost glowing off at the intersection down the road. Everyone in their homes were asleep. I was totally alone in the darkness. I heard something scrape at the back door from inside the van, and a soft clunk as the door opened. It opened slowly at first, as if a creature inside were checking to see if it were safe. I hit the emergency call button just as the door swung all the way open. 911, what's your emergency? 911, what's your emergency? But I couldn't speak. I was frozen. The door bounced back as it fully opened, and out fell a naked body, tangled limbs hitting the pavement, a mess of blonde hair shimmering in the dark. When the person rose up again, I almost passed out. It was Dean. Hello? Hello? I said in the phone. I need help. I need help. Someone. He was in my van. Please send police to... Lulu barked and jumped forward. Jesus fucking Christ, Dean said, shaking out his limbs. Can someone please tell this fucking dog to shut up? Dean was covered in sweat, wearing only his boxer shorts. He looked sickly and diseased. All fucking night it's just bark, 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 yap, yap, yap. He exhaled and stretched out his arms, and I saw he was holding a knife in his hand. With his free hand, he swiped back the sweaty hair off his forehead. Cooped up in a hot-ass truck for hours under all your useless shit. Had to take off my clothes, it was so damn hot. And I gotta hear that fucking dog barking non-stop? Please send help, I said into the phone, repeating my sister's address over and over. Please, he's got a knife. Oh, he's got a knife, does he? Oh, boo-hoo. And Dean walked forward, holding the knife out toward Lulu, tossing it casually from hand to hand. Every time I try to make a move, this bitch goes nuts on me. Yap, 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 yap. Dean, please, just, I don't know what you want, but please. You should be thanking me, you know that? He waved the knife from side to side as if reprimanding me. I'm way out of your league. So the fact that I chose you tonight, it's really an act of charity. Okay, I said. I would have said anything to get him to go away. Okay, I'm sorry. You want the truth? It wasn't even me who wanted you. I thought you were a 6, maybe 7 at best. But my brother? He thought you looked tasty enough. So I say, okay, fine, sure. I'll get you and bring you back to me. I'm a good brother, aren't I? That's what good brothers do. They do favors. I wanted his first time to be special. No, I know. You're a good brother. I still held the phone up to my ear, hoping the operator could hear me. This all could have been so easy. So fucking easy. Would have been over by now, but no. Because Miss Yap 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 over there. He gripped the knife tight, squatting as he stepped forward, his eyes on Lulu. So keep crying into the phone, but make sure you tell them your dog is dead too, because the bitch deserved it. No! Dean lunged forward, slashing the knife at her. Lulu yelped and flipped to the side as the blade swept across her back. Her body scrambling over the pavement, but then it was Dean who screamed, falling back as his knife landed on the ground. Fuck! Jesus Christ, my hand! Even in the darkness, I could see the blood pour from Lulu's back where the blade had sliced her open, but I could also see her spit out a mangled hand onto the pavement, as if it were nothing but a squeak toy. I'm gonna kill this fucking dog! Dean screamed. Blood poured from the stump at his wrist. With his other hand, he reached down to grab the knife, then turned to face her, but Lulu was already upon him. Lunging up in the air, her own blood streaking off the gash in her back as she flew. This time she aimed for his face. A severed hand, it turns out, is a more than adequate DNA sample. It only took a few days before the police were able to match Dean's DNA with the DNA found on the bodies of the 7 women who were found in the woods down the highway from the auto repair shop. Dean's mugshot showed a guy with a mutilated, torn-up face, bruised and bloodied and held together with stitches. When the police had arrived that night outside my sister's house, they had found him half dead on the sidewalk, blood leaking from his neck. As for Lulu and me, I had already carried her inside the house. The police found us on the tile floor of the kitchen, Lulu bleeding out in my lap, unmoving, while I whispered to her, I love you, girl. I love you so much. It wasn't long before Dean's brother Abel was arrested as an accessory to the crimes. During a news conference a few days later, the police chief said that for the past year and a half, the 2 brothers had been using road traps on the back road highway to cause damage to passing vehicles, forcing them to stop. In most cases, they fixed the cars, and that was that. Nothing more than a scam to gain business for their father's shop. But when the driver was a pretty young woman, the two used the shop's tow truck to lure the woman away to a remote location past the cornfields. DNA samples from at least 4 women were found inside the truck. With the last would-be victim, the brothers appeared to have gotten reckless and instead lured her right to the repair shop, said the police chief during the press conference. Had the young woman not been accompanied by her dog, a pit bull mixed by the name of Lulu, there's no telling what. I closed my laptop. I didn't want to hear the rest. Later, I saw in an online article a photo of their father, Richard, shielding his face as reporters surrounded him. There was no evidence he'd been involved in any way. He'd seemed shocked when the police came to the auto shop. I felt bad for him. He seemed like a good man. I couldn't even imagine what he was thinking. The police chief had said the brothers had been committing the assaults and murders for the last year and a half, which means they would have started right after their mother died. The timing made me feel sick. Richard had said his wife's death was from natural causes, that she died peacefully in her sleep. I like to believe that's the case. I like to believe the brothers had waited for their mother to die, and that's the only reason they started their murder spree right after her funeral. Despite all they did, I really hope, if only for Richard's sake, that they hadn't gotten impatient and done something to their own mother. It was surreal trying to get settled in a new place after this. I felt like my old life had been years and years ago. My ex did text me once, though, just after he heard the news. "Hope you're okay," the text said. Normally I would have sat for hours deliberating over how to respond, but now I texted back right away. "I am," I said. I watched 3 dots pop up in the bubble as he was typing something. Then they disappeared again. That night, the news ran a segment about Lulu. There was a whole ceremony in her honor. Normally, I wouldn't have watched the rest of the coverage of the case. It was already traumatic enough. I was told I would have to testify. That would be a long process, and I wanted to avoid it as much as I could. But I made sure to watch the news segment on Lulu. "A moment of celebration today as Lulu the Scrappy Pit Bull Mix gets a hero's welcome outside the East Side Animal Hospital," said the news anchor. So many people had showed up to the animal hospital earlier that afternoon to celebrate Lulu's discharge. The footage held on Lulu's face as she eyed the crowd of police officers, the news crews, the reporters, and hospital staff. I was right beside her in the footage, looking just as awkward. "See that girl?" I said as I watched the coverage with her later that night. Lulu was curled on my lap on the couch as I stroked the long scar on her back, the jagged ridges where the animal doctors had sewn her up again. "That's you and me on the news, see, girl?" Lulu had been sleeping, and now she lifted up her head, drowsy from the commotion of the day. She didn't seem too interested about her 15 minutes of fame. She just sighed and plopped her head right back down again on my stomach and went back to sleep. When the news was over, I nudged Lulu awake, and after, she went outside to pee. The two of us shuffled down the hall. I led Lulu into the guest bedroom. As I pulled down the covers on the bed, Lulu went to lie down on the hardwood floor in the corner of the room by herself. No, come here, girl." She glanced up at me, one paw on top of the other. I patted the bed. "You sleep up here from now on. Come on up." She made a soft noise, her tail wagging. Then she hopped up awkwardly on the bed, still a little sore from her wounds. As I shut off the lamp, Lulu nuzzled up against my legs, resting her head on my thigh. "Comfy?" I asked. She sighed, a grumbly, growling purr in response. "Get used to it, pretty girl. You've more than earned it." And that was called Drive Safe by Reddit user Mr. Knopf. We're getting ready to go into our last story. Your headcanon is that the pages are blank and that I'm winging it? No. Someone prints them off for me, actually. I don't know who. Someone leaves them at my door, but, this is one of the stories from last week on paper. But same thing with this week. They they sent just the pages this time. Whoever it was, someone on the dark web, I'm assuming. The postage on it was blank. There was no return address. But last week, while I was looking for a real copy, this appeared on my doorstep. If it says the Sauciest Necronomicus, which is, I'm looking for the real copy, but I haven't been able to find it. Some people say it isn't real. Some people say it doesn't exist. Others say that I shouldn't look for it because there is only one real copy. Which, if it is, good God, I hope I find that. That'd be really crazy. But the note that was on it when it came, though, it said, "Be careful what you wish for." So obviously, I don't know, probably just someone trying to spook me. But yeah. But this is the plan every Saturday night, until people say they aren't enjoying it or anything like that. But people keep coming back and saying they're loving it, and I'm enjoying doing it too, so I'll keep doing that. And for those of you who can't stay for the whole stream, or if you want to check this out, but you have other things to do on Saturday nights, I am planning. I'm in the middle of. I'm almost done editing the first episode, and the second one I'll go through it a lot quicker, and then the third one. But I'm planning on uploading these both to YouTube and to Spotify. If you can't, if there's times that you can't stay, or about it, and you're like, 10 p.m. That's tough. 10 p.m. Eastern to get there for that. That's tough. I can't do that. So soon, very soon, within the next, hopefully, fingers crossed, within the next week, all 3 episodes will be up, and then every episode after that will be released weekly, hopefully. So let's get to our last final saucy story. And like I said, this one is not from our usual places that we search for. But I think this was a fun little, kind of creepier one. It can be creepy. It actually comes from Creepypasta. I thought this was a fun little story that I felt we could end it off on. It's actually not too long. It's probably about the same length, if not a little shorter, than the one we had just read. But if everyone is ready, get yourselves cozy, get yourselves comfortable, as we embark on the last tale, titled The No End House. Let me start by saying that Peter Terry was addicted to heroin. We were friends in college and continued to be after I graduated. Notice that I said I. He dropped out after 2 years of barely cutting it. After I moved out of the dorms and into a small apartment, I didn't see Peter as much. We would talk online every now and then. AIM was king in pre-Facebook years. There was a period where he wasn't online for about 5 weeks straight. I wasn't worried. He was a pretty notorious flake and a drug addict, so I assumed he just stopped caring. Then one night I saw him log on. Before I could initiate a conversation, he sent me a message. "David, man, we need to talk." That was when he told me about the No End House. It got that name because no one had ever reached the final exit. The rules were pretty simple and cliche. Reach the final room of the building and you win $500. There were 9 rooms in all. The house was located outside the city, roughly 4 miles from my house. Apparently Peter had tried and failed. He was a heroin and who knows what the fuck addict, so I figured the drugs got the best of him and he wigged out at a paper ghost or something. He told me it would be too much for anyone, that it was unnatural. I didn't believe him. I told him I would check it out the next night, and no matter how hard he tried to convince me otherwise, $500 sounded too good to be true. I had to go. I set out the following night. When I arrived, I immediately noticed something strange about the building. Have you ever seen or read something that shouldn't be scary, but for some reason a chill crawls up your spine? I walked toward the building, and the feeling of uneasiness only intensified as I opened the front door. My heart slowed, and I let a relieved sigh leave me as I entered. The room looked like a normal hotel lobby decorated for Halloween. A sign was posted in place of a worker. It read, "Room 1 this way. 8 more to follow, reach the end, and you win." I chuckled and made my way to the first door. The first area was almost laughable. The decor resembled the Halloween aisle of a Kmart, complete with sheet ghosts and animatronic zombies that gave a static growl when you passed by. At the far end was an exit. It was the only door besides the one I entered through. I brushed through the fake spiderwebs and headed for the second room. I was greeted by fog as I opened the door to room 2. The room definitely upped the ante in terms of technology. Not only was there a fog machine, but a bat hung from the ceiling and flew in a circle. Scary. They seemed to have a Halloween soundtrack that one would find in a 99-cent store on loop somewhere in the room. I didn't see a stereo, but I guess they must have used a PA system. I stepped over a few toy wraps that wheeled around and walked with a puffed chest across to the next area. I reached for the doorknob and my heart sank to my knees. I did not want to open that door. A feeling of dread hit me so hard I could barely even think. Logic overtook me after a few terrified moments, and I shook it off as I entered the room. Room 3 was when things began to change. On the surface, it looked like a normal room. There was a chair in the middle of the wood-paneled floor. A single lamp in the corner did a poor job of lighting the area, casting a few shadows across the floors and walls. That was the problem. Shadows. Plural. With the exception of the chairs, there were others. I had barely walked in the door and I was already terrified. It was at this moment I knew that something wasn't right. I didn't even think as I automatically tried to open the door I came through. It was locked from the other side. That set me off. Was someone locking the doors as I progressed? There was no way. I would have heard them. Was it a mechanical lock that set automatically? Maybe. But I was too scared to really think. I turned back to the room and the shadows were gone. The chair's shadow remained, but the others were gone. I slowly began to walk. I used to hallucinate when I was a kid, so I wrote off the shadows as a figment of my imagination. I began to feel better as I made my way to the halfway point of the room. I looked down as I took my steps, and that's when I saw it. Or didn't see it. A shadow wasn't there. I didn't have time to scream. I ran as fast as I could to the other door and flung myself without thinking into the room beyond. The fourth room was possibly the most disturbing. As I closed the door, all light seemed to be sucked out and put back into the previous room. I stood there, surrounded by darkness, not able to move. I'm not afraid of the dark and never have been, but I was absolutely terrified. All sight had left me. I held my hand in front of my face, and if I didn't know what I was doing, I would never have been able to tell. Darkness doesn't describe it. I couldn't hear anything. It was dead silence. When you're in a soundproof room, you can still hear yourself breathing. You can hear yourself being alive. I couldn't. I began to stumble forward after a few moments. My rapidly beating heart, the only thing I could feel. There was no door in sight. Wasn't even sure there was one this time. The silence was then broken by a low hum. I felt something behind me. I spun around wildly but could barely even see my nose. I knew it was there though, regardless of how dark it was. I knew something was there. The hum grew louder, closer. It seemed to surround me. But I knew whatever was causing the noise was in front of me, inching closer. I took a step back. I had never felt that kind of fear. I can't really describe true fear. I wasn't even scared I was going to die. I was scared of what the alternative was. I was afraid of what this thing had in store for me. Then the lights flashed for a second. I saw it. Nothing. I saw nothing, and I know I saw nothing there. The room was again plunged in darkness, and the hum began a wild screech, louder than anything I had ever heard in my life. Then it growled. I couldn't hear this goddamn sound for another minute. I ran backwards away from the noise and fumbled for the door handle. I turned and fell into room 5. Before I describe room 5, you have to understand something. I am not a drug addict. I have had no history of drug abuse or any sort of psychosis short of the childhood hallucinations I mentioned earlier, and those were only when I was really tired of just waking up. I entered the no-end house with a clear head. After falling in from the previous room, my view of room 5 was from my back, looking up at the ceiling. What I saw didn't scare me, it simply surprised me. Trees had grown into the room and towered above my head. The ceilings in this room were taller than the others, which made me think I was in the center of the house. I got up off the floor, dusted myself off, and took a look around. It was definitely the biggest room of them all. I couldn't even see the door from where I was. Various brush and trees must have blocked my line of sight with the exit. Up to this point, I figured the rooms were going to get scarier, but this was a paradise compared to the last room. I also assumed whatever was in room 4 stayed back there. I was incredibly wrong. As I made my way deeper into the room, I began to hear what one would hear if they were in a forest. Chirping bugs and the occasional flap of birds seemed to be my only company in this room. That was the thing that bothered me the most. I heard the bugs and other animals, but I didn't see any of them. I began to wonder how big this house was. From the outside, when I first walked up to it, it looked like a regular house. It was definitely bigger on the side, but this was almost a full forest in here. The canopy covered my view of the ceiling, but I assumed it was still there, however high it was. I couldn't see any walls either. The only way I knew I was still inside was that the floor matched the other rooms, the standard dark wood paneling. I kept walking, hoping that the next tree I passed would reveal the next door. After a few moments of walking, I felt a mosquito land on my shoulder, or fly onto my arm. I shook it off and kept going. A second later, I felt about 10 more land on my skin at different places. I felt them crawl up and down my arms and legs, and a few made their way across my face. I flailed wildly to get them all off, but they just kept crawling. I looked down and let out a muffled scream, more of a whimper to be honest. I didn't see a single bug. Not one bug was on me, but I could feel them crawl. I heard them fly by my face and sting my skin, but I couldn't see a single one. I dropped to the ground and began to roll wildly. I was desperate. I hated bugs, especially the ones I couldn't see or touch. But these bugs could touch me, and they were everywhere. I began to crawl. I had no idea where I was going. The entrance was nowhere in sight, and I still hadn't even seen the exit. So I just crawled, my skin wriggling with the presence of those phantom bugs. After what seemed like hours, I found the door. I grabbed the nearest tree and propped myself up, mindlessly slapping my arms and legs to no avail. I tried to run, but I couldn't. My body was exhausted from crawling and dealing with whatever it was that was on me. I took a few shaky steps to the door, grabbing each tree on the way for support. It was only a few feet away when I heard it. The low hum from before. It was coming from the next room, and it was deeper. I could almost feel it inside of my body, like when you stand next to an amp at a concert. The feeling of the bugs on me lessened as the hum grew louder. As I placed my hand on the doorknob, the bugs were completely gone, but I couldn't bring myself to turn the knob. I knew that if I let go, the bugs would return, and there was no way I would make it back to room 4. I just stood there, my head pressed against the door marked 6, and my hand shakily grasping the knob. The hum was so loud I couldn't even hear myself pretend to think. There was nothing I could do but move on. Room 6 was next. And room 6 was hell. I closed the door behind me, my eyes held shut and my ears ringing. The hum was surrounding me. As the door clicked into place, the hum was gone. I opened my eyes in surprise, and the door I had shut was gone. It was just a wall now. I looked around in shock. The room was identical to room 3, the same chair and lamp, but with the correct amount of shadows this time. The only real difference was that there was no exit door, and the one I came in through was gone. As I said before, I had no previous issues in terms of mental instability, but at that moment, I fell into what I know now as insanity. I didn't scream. I didn't make a sound. At first, I scratched softly. The wall was tough, but I knew the door was there somewhere. I just knew it was. I scratched it where the doorknob was. I clawed at the wall frantically with both hands, my nails being filed down to the skin against the wood. I fell silently to my knees. The only sound in the room, the incessant scratching against the wall. I knew it was there. The door was there. I knew it was just there. I knew if I could just get past this wall. Are you all right? I jumped off the ground and spun in one motion. I leaned against the wall behind me and saw what it was that spoke to me. To this day, I regret ever turning around. There was a little girl. She was wearing a soft white dress that went down to her ankles. She had long blonde hair to the middle of her back and white skin and blue eyes. She was the most frightening thing I had ever seen, and I know that nothing in my life will ever be as unnerving as what I saw in her. While looking at her, I saw something else. Where she stood, I saw what looked like a man's body, only larger than normal and covered in hair. He was naked from head to toe, but his head was not human, and his toes were hooves. It wasn't the devil, but at that moment it might as well have been. The form had the head of a ram and the snout of a wolf. It was horrifying, and it was synonymous with the little girl in front of me. They were the same form. I can't really describe it, but I saw them at the same time. They shared the same spot in that room, but it was like looking at 2 separate dimensions. When I saw the girl, I saw the form, and when I saw the form, I saw the girl. I couldn't speak. I could barely even see. My mind was revolting against what it was attempting to process. I had been scared before in my life, and I had never been more scared than when I was trapped in the 4th room. But that was before room 6. I just stood there, staring at whatever it was that spoke to me. There was no exit. I was trapped here with it. And then it spoke again. David, you should have listened. When it spoke, I heard the words of the little girl, but the other form spoke through my mind in a voice I won't attempt to describe. There was no other sound. The voice just kept repeating that sentence over and over in my mind, and I agreed. I didn't know what to do. I was slipping into madness, yet couldn't take my eyes off what was in front of me. I dropped to the floor. I thought I had passed out, but the broom wouldn't let me. I just wanted it to end. I was on my side, my eyes wide open, and the form staring down at me. Scurrying across the floor in front of me was one of the battery-powered rats from the 2nd room. The house was toying with me, but for some reason, seeing that rat pulled my mind back from whatever depths it was headed in, and I looked around the room. I was getting out of there. I was determined to get out of that house and live and never think about this place again. I knew this room was hell, and I wasn't ready to take up a residency. At first, it was just my eyes that moved. I searched the walls for any kind of opening. The room wasn't that big, so it didn't take long to soak up the entire layout. The demon still taunted me, the voice growing louder as the form stayed rooted where it stood. I placed my hand on the floor, lifted myself up to all 4, and turned to scan the wall behind me. Then I saw something I couldn't believe. The form was now right at my back, whispering into my mind how I shouldn't have come. I felt its breath on the back of my neck, but I refused to turn around. A large rectangle was scratched into the wood with a small dent chipped away in the center of it. Right in front of my eyes, I saw the large 7 I had mindlessly etched into the wall. I knew what it was. Room 7 was just beyond the wall where room 5 was moments ago. I don't know how I had done it. Maybe it was just my state of mind at the time, but I had created the door. I knew I had. In my madness, I had scratched into the wall what I needed the most, an exit to the room. Room 7 was close. I knew the demon was right behind me, but for some reason it couldn't touch me. I closed my eyes and placed both hands on the large 7 in front of me. I pushed as hard as I could. The demon was now screaming in my ear. It told me I was never leaving. It told me that this was the end, but I wasn't going to die. I was going to live there in room 6 with it. I wasn't. I pushed and screamed at the top of my lungs. I knew I was going to push through the wall eventually. I clenched my eyes shut and screamed, and the demon was gone. I was left in silence. I turned around slowly and was greeted by the room as it was when I entered, just a chair and a lamp. I couldn't believe it, but I didn't have time too well. I turned back to the 7 and jumped back slightly. What I saw was a door. It wasn't the one I had scratched in, but a regular door with a large 7 on it. My whole body was shaking. It took me a while to turn the knob. I just stood there for a while, staring at the door. I couldn't stay in room 6. I couldn't. But if this was only room 6, I couldn't imagine what 7 had in store. I must have stood there for an hour just staring at the 7. Finally, with a deep breath, I twisted the knob and opened the door to room 7. I stumbled through the door, mentally exhausted and physically weak. The door behind me was closed, and I realized where I was. I was outside. Not outside like room 5, but actually outside. My eyes stung. I wanted to cry. I fell to my knees and tried, but I couldn't. I was finally out of that hell. I didn't even care about the prize that was promised. I turned and saw that the door I just went through was the entrance. I walked to my car and drove home, thinking of how nice a shower sounded. As I pulled up to my house, I felt uneasy. The joy of leaving No End House had faded, and dread was slowly building in my stomach. I shook it off as residual from the house and made my way to the front door. I entered and immediately went up to my room. There on my bed was my cat, Baskerville. He was the first living thing I had seen all night, and I reached to pet him. He hissed and swiped at my hand. I recoiled in shock, as he had never acted like that. I thought, whatever, he's an old cat. I jumped in the shower and got ready for what I was expecting to be a sleepless night. After my shower, I went to the kitchen to make something to eat. I descended the stairs and turned into the family room. What I saw would be forever burned into my memory, however. My parents were lying on the ground, naked and covered in blood. They were mutilated to near unidentifiable states. Their limbs were removed and placed next to their bodies, and their heads were placed on their chests facing me. The most unsettling part was their expression. They were smiling, as though they were happy to see me. I vomited and sobbed there in the family room. I didn't know what had happened. They didn't even live with me at the time. I was a mess. Then I saw it, a door that was never there before. A door with a large 8 scrawled on it in blood. I was still in the house. I was standing in my family room, but I was in room 7. The faces of my parents smiled wider as I realized this. They weren't my parents. They couldn't be, but they looked exactly like them. The door marked 8 was across the room, behind the mutilated bodies in front of me. I knew I had to move on, but at that moment I gave up. The smiling faces tore into my mind. They grounded me where I stood. I vomited again and nearly collapsed. Then the hum returned. It was louder than ever and it filled the house and shook the walls. The hum compelled me to walk. I began to walk slowly, making my way closer to the door and the bodies. I could barely stand, let alone walk, and the closer I got to my parents, the closer I came to suicide. The walls were now shaking so hard it seemed as though they were going to crumble, but still the faces smiled at me. As I inched closer, their eyes followed me. I was now between the 2 bodies, a few feet away from the door. The dismembered hands crawled their way across the carpet towards me, all while the faces continued to stare. New terror washed over me, and I walked faster, and I didn't want to hear them speak. I didn't want the voices to match those of my parents. They began to open their mouths, and the hands were inches from my feet. In a dash of desperation, I lunged toward the door, threw it open, and slammed it behind me. Room 8. I was done. After what I had just experienced, I knew there wasn't anything this fucking house could throw at me that I couldn't live through. There was nothing short of the fires of hell that I wasn't ready for. Unfortunately, I underestimated the abilities of No End House. And unfortunately, things got more disturbing, more terrifying, and more unspeakable in Room 8. I still have trouble believing what I saw in Room 8. Again, the room was a carbon copy of Rooms 3 and 6. But sitting in the usually empty chair was a man. After a few seconds of disbelief, my mind finally accepted the fact that the man sitting in the chair was me. Not someone who looked like me. It was David Williams. I walked closer. I had to get a better look, even though I was sure of it. He looked at me and I noticed tears in his eyes. Please don't do it. Please don't hurt me. What? I asked. Who are you? I'm not going to hurt you. Yes, you are. He was sobbing now. You're going to hurt me, and I don't want you to. He sat in the chair with his legs up and began rocking back and forth. It was actually pretty pathetic looking, especially since he was me, identical in every way. Listen, who are you? I was now only a few feet away from my doppelganger. It was the weirdest experience yet, standing there, talking to myself. I wasn't scared, but I would be soon. Why are you... You're going to hurt me. You're going to hurt me. If you want to leave, you're going to hurt me. Why are you saying this? Just calm down, all right? Let's try and figure this... And then I saw it. The David sitting down was wearing the same clothes as me, except for a small red patch on his shirt embroidered with the number 9. You're going to hurt me. You're going to hurt me. Don't please. You're going to hurt me. My eyes didn't leave that small number on his chest. I knew exactly what it was. The first few doors were plain and simple, but after a while they got a little more ambiguous. 7 was scratched into the wall by my own hands. 8 was marked in blood above the bodies of my parents. But 9, this number was on a person. A living person. Worse still, it was on a person that looked exactly like me. David? I had to ask. Yes. You're going to hurt me. You're going to hurt me. He continued to sob and rock. He answered to David. He was me, right down to the voice. But that 9. I paced around for a few minutes while he sobbed in his chair. The room had no door, and similarly to room 6, the door I came through was gone. For some reason, I assumed that scratching would get me nowhere this time. I studied the walls and floor around the chair, sticking my head underneath and seeing if anything was below. Unfortunately, there was. Below the chair was a knife. Attached was a tag that read, "To David, from management." The feeling in my stomach as I read that tag was something sinister. I wanted to throw up, and the last thing I wanted to do was remove that knife from under the chair. The other David was still sobbing uncontrollably. My mind was spinning into an attic of unanswerable questions. Who put this here, and how did they get my name? Not to mention the fact that as I knelt on the cold wood floor, I also sat in that chair, sobbing in protest of being hurt by myself. It was all too much to process. The house and the management had been playing with me this whole time. My thoughts, for some reason, turned to Peter and whether or not he got this far. If he did, if he met a Peter Terry sobbing in this very chair, rocking back and forth. I shook those thoughts out of my head. They didn't matter. I took the knife from under the chair and immediately the other David went quiet. "David," he said in my voice, "what do you think you're going to do?" I lifted myself from the ground and clenched the knife in my hand. "I'm going to get out of here." David was sitting in the chair, though he was very calm now. He looked up at me with a slight grin. I couldn't tell if he was going to laugh or strangle me. Slowly, he got up from the chair and stood, facing me. It was uncanny. His height, and even the way he stood, matched mine. I felt the rubber hilt of the knife in my hand and gripped it tighter. I don't know what I was planning on doing with it, but I had a feeling I was going to need it. "Now," his voice was slightly deeper than my own, "I'm going to hurt you. I'm going to hurt you, and I'm going to keep you here." I didn't respond. I just lunged and tackled him to the ground. I had mounted him and looked down, knife poised and ready. He looked up at me, terrified. It was like I was looking in a mirror. Then the hum returned, low and distant, though I still felt it deep in my body. David looked up at me as I looked down at myself. The hum was getting louder, and I felt something inside me snap. With one motion, I slammed the knife into the patch on his chest and ripped down. Blackness fell on the room, and I was falling. The darkness around me was like nothing I had experienced up at that point. Room 4 was dark, but it didn't come close to what was completely engulfing me. I wasn't even sure if I was falling after a while. I felt weightless, covered in dark. Then a deep sadness came over me. I felt lost, depressed, suicidal. The sight of my parents entered my mind. I knew it wasn't real, but I had seen it, and the mind has trouble differentiating between what is and what isn't real. The sadness only deepened. I was in room 9 for what seemed like days, the final room, and that's exactly what it was, the end. No End House had an end, and I had reached it. At that moment I gave up. I knew I would be in that in-between state forever, accompanied by nothing but darkness. Not even the hum there was going to keep me sane. I had lost all senses. I couldn't feel myself. I couldn't hear anything. Sight was completely useless here. I searched for a taste in my mouth and found nothing. I felt disembodied and completely lost. I knew where I was. This was hell. Room 9 was hell. And it happened. A light. One of those stereotypical lights at the end of the tunnel. I felt ground coming up from below me, and I was standing. After a moment or two of gathering my thoughts and senses, I slowly walked toward that light. As I approached the light, it took form. It was a vertical slit down the side of an unmarked door. I slowly walked through the door and found myself back where I started, the lobby of No End House. It was exactly how I left it. Still empty, still decorated with childish Halloween decorations. After everything that had happened that night, I was still wary of where I was. After a few more moments of normalcy, I looked around the place trying to find anything different. On the desk was a plain white envelope with my name handwritten on it. Immensely curious, yet still cautious, I mustered up the courage to open the envelope. Inside was a letter, again handwritten. "David Williams, congratulations! You have made it to the end of No End House. Please accept this prize as a token of great achievement. Yours forever, Management." With the letter were 5 $100 bills. I couldn't stop laughing. I laughed for what seemed like hours. I laughed as I walked out to my car, and laughed as I drove home. I laughed as I pulled into my driveway. I laughed as I opened my front door to my house, and laughed as I saw the small 10 etched into the wood. And that story was written by Brian Russell. And our last story of the night. Spooky, huh? Would you do it? Would you go into a a spooky house titled No End House for $500? How did they give up? How did Peter get out? Or if Peter didn't get out, maybe that's the mystery. What if Peter completed it? and he never got out. Right? Think about that. The thing that came to him wasn't really his friend. It was just something to lure another person to it. So that means maybe he's still trapped in the no-end house, and his doppelganger thing from Rune 9 is now trying to get one of his friends to do the next challenge, or the next foray into no-end house. Right? But before I forget, let me at least close out the book and readings tonight with our typical protection and sealing prayer. All ghosts that have entered this home on this evening will now return to thy final resting place. All evil you try to send the witnesses tonight's way, upon your own self thou will find it returned. All actions, thoughts, and plans of hate become your own decided fate. By all that is above and all that is below, by oceans wide and lands so vast, by day and by night, and powers that be, this is my will, and so it shall be. Bring harm to none, and none to me. Ghosts of unrest, return to this saucy tome, and rest easy once more. And that is the end of our spooky tales for tonight. I hope you guys enjoyed them, though. There were some good ones there. There were some really spooky ones tonight. Maybe not as many, like, jump scary, but more of those ones that, get under your bone, like, get under your skin and just chill you to the bone, right? But I hope you all had incredible nights. I hope these tales spooked you and chilled you to the bone. And even if you're listening to this at a later date, I hope they still chilled you and spooked you to the bone. But until next Saturday night, for those of you who are here tonight, I hope you all stay protected, stay spooky, stay safe, but most importantly, stay saucy. Peace out, and I'll see you guys later.